Hello and welcome to Story Radio, the podcast for readers, writers and lovers of short stories. Today we'll be talking to Goran Baba Ali about his novel, The Glass Wall, and the press that printed it, Afsana Press.
So, Goran, could you tell us a little bit about Afsana Press and how you set it up?
Actually, the idea of Afsana Press is, I think in 2010 or 11, I had the idea for a press to print Kurdish books in Iraqi Kurdistan, where I am originally from. But at the time, I published like a short novel by myself in the Kurdish language, and then I published another book for another author, but it didn't work actually. And so I loved the idea until last year when I finished The Glass Wall, and then I thought, wait a second, I still love that idea to have a publishing house, to run a publishing house and work with other authors. So why shouldn't I do that again? Try it again, this time in the English language, because my own novel, so The Glass Wall, I've written it in English. So I studied how to run a publishing house. I even followed the training and researched the whole market and stuff like that. And so this is how I came to the idea. But then, so from the very beginning, the idea was not only a self-publishing company, but also to publish for other authors. And that was hard. But so after the book, I contacted some friends first, people I know, and so it came to a collaboration now. I mean, Miki Lentin is now a partner in the enterprise, let's say, and we are now working on broadening it to like some kind of author collection even.
Great, thank you. And I really enjoyed reading The Glass Wall, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Actually, also the idea for The Glass Wall is also a bit old. In 2012, when I still lived in Amsterdam, and I remember then we had also some like a so-called refugee crisis. So at the time, there were many refugees, especially from Syria, but also from other parts, especially in Turkey, and they were trying to come to Europe, and there was already like talks about a refugee crisis. But there was also I was thinking for some time about this idea of the difference between these two worlds of the so-called Western world, let's say, and the rest of the world. How people in countries with conflict and wars or whatever, economic problems or poor countries, how they look at the Western world as a beautiful, setting and developed, safe world. But actually, you can't reach it. It is as if you look at it through a glass wall. But the problem is the other side. It also boasts about what it is. You show off of this serenity and development and safety. I lived Iraqi Kurdistan like I think 28 years ago, so I became also part of this Western world, let's say. So we show off with what we have, but then we don't have an empathy for the other world. I mean, we understand it, but a real empathy, it is not easy to have. And then I had that idea. It's kind of like you are looking into a mirror. We saw ourselves, and while the other side sees us. So I had these ideas. I was working with like a glass wall, or the idea of a glass ceiling, which you can feel actually as a human being, as an individual in many things, even like in a labor market you can feel something like that. So it was a combination of these two ideas, that glass wall.
So was the kind of generalised mythological kind of way of telling it always your starting point in the novel, or was that something that kind of developed as you were writing it?
What you are referring to as a mythological or mythical tone or voice probably in the novel, I think that comes from the storytelling, because most of the stories, at least the backstories, are told by the main character, the Arman, the asylum seeker in the novel. But those stories are actually, he's telling them from his grandmother. So these were all stories he heard from his grandmother, and also the history parts from his father and grandmother. So these are stories that were for almost a decade, for almost a century in their family. So through these stories, he tells the almost the story of his nation since the beginning of the 20th century. And so that is all storytelling, and an asylum seeker has to, when you apply for asylum, you also have to tell stories. So storytelling is actually the main issue in that novel. So I thought, how can I keep one voice from the beginning to the end whenever it's about Arman, behind that glass wall, which so this story is told by the author, right? But then without a lot of authorial intervention, let's say, but then telling it through Arman himself, who's a 19-year-old boy. So how can I keep that voice telling about the story now and also retelling or recounting the stories of his grandma? So I think that is what it makes the whole novel a bit mythical, if that is what you are referring to.
But also the group he's a part of, everyone has kind of their names, which kind of give it, and a lot of it felt to me a bit like kind of Waiting for Godot, that kind of it was a generalised kind of, it wasn't like you could say this is a particular place. It kind of felt like a more universal place.
That was my intention, to have a universal story, not of one person coming from a part of the world and going to a certain part of the world, but it can be from anywhere. So this refugee can be from anywhere where conflict is and where there are reasons for somebody to flee their country, and so the city behind the wall, let's say the glass wall, that could be also anywhere. Of course, both worlds, so in my head, let's say, or for my plot, of course they have roots in, you can find out where they are, but it doesn't matter, so that is not important. And that is why I also chose for no character having any name except for Arman, the main character, the protagonist. The rest are named by either their profession or what they do, what they are, things like that. I think that is what you mean, and of course, I can imagine that creates some kind of mythical atmosphere, at least, but also the events. And I like it that you saw the Godot in it, Waiting for Godot, because this is indeed one of the stories that was in my mind or had influenced me, was Godot, but also some Kafka. So there is, I think, some Kafkan atmosphere also in it.
Were you influenced at all by the 1001 Nights and Scheherazade, because that's what struck me in the sort of
also
the structure.
Definitely. Also, I think the structure is a bit the 1001 Nights stories, because that is exactly what it is. So this Arman, this guy, this asylum seeker, has to tell stories to be let into the city. So the guard behind the glass wall, who's guarding, so the old man who's guarding the only gate to the city, can't open the wall unless Arman tells a convincing story. And that is indeed, this is the same in 1000 Nights, the Arabian Nights. In English it's translated as the Arabian Nights. I think that is that is the...
Did you find there was any difficulties that you found from taking that position rather than going for a kind of hard realistic narrative?
I think it is challenging. It was really challenging, but also very nice to do it, actually, because that is writing. I mean, when you struggle with something, especially the setup. So how can you set up a story like that and try not ending up with something simplistic, let's say, because it could be. I mean, that story, the core of the story is very simple. I think the idea is very simple. So you can write it into any kind of story or style. But the style I chose, first of all, it is storytelling, but secondly, it is very symbolic. So almost everything in there is symbolic, I think. From the glass wall itself, to the guard, to the refugee himself, but also all the events. I mean, the animals come into it. Almost everything is symbolic in there.
Was there an element of Kurt Vonnegut, after experiencing the Dresden bombing, he was trying to write about it for years and years, and he kind of ended up not being able to write about it directly. So Slaughterhouse 5 is like this kind of science fiction retelling in multiple forms. Was that an element that you found it difficult to kind of write about it directly?
I think so. That's a good reference, actually. I think so because some of the stuff, mind you, is I have experienced it myself, probably in different ways, like being in a desert for weeks. I think I spent 6 weeks in a desert without food, with barely any food and drink. Not as a refugee in another setup, but also I see myself as an ex-refugee. Let's say this is what I call myself, because I came to Europe also as a refugee, like 28 years ago. I think it's 28 years ago, and it is not easy to write that if it is not a memoir. So if you want to make it a fiction, you need other characters, you need other settings, and if that is what you mean, that's what your question. I think that made it extra difficult. But therefore, you need forms. You need really because you are fictionalizing it. So you need all this form or the style we talked about. I think it is to cover up, to make it not a memoir kind of thing or autobiographical, but very fictional, right?
So the ending, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it doesn't resolve neatly. Was that always your intention, or did you kind of struggle with different possibilities for the ending?
Yeah. From the beginning, I knew how it will end. Of course, it is very difficult to try not to spoil it and make sense what I mean by that. I'm not sure if it isn't resolved neatly, because for me, even it is a bit shocking or surprising ending, but I think there is some kind of satisfaction, like vaguely satisfaction, because at least somebody is happy of the result, although tragical for the protagonist or for the main character. But I can imagine that it can be disturbing for some readers, but I don't think it is very unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's unsatisfactory. I just wondered, how much that was kind of always where you were heading, or whether you were.
It was my intention. Yeah. So it was my. Usually when I write, when I have a story, actually, I can't write a story if I don't know the ending. I think it is most of the time with me. It's been always like that. So I know the ending, and I tried, and I need also a good start. But then I write into that kind of. But yes, I definitely knew, and to be honest, it was also a lot of consideration to change it, because. It's also, I know it's a problematic ending, but again, there is also some symbolism in that ending. And I don't want to promise anything, but my idea, during writing this novel, I knew the story can be told in a trilogy. So somehow I also brought it to that end, so that if I decide to write a sequel, I can take it from there. So that was also some consideration that I finally thought, no, I don't want to change it. I want to keep to this ending.
Mickey, if you can.
So the thing that I really liked about the book was I think that the symbolism of the wall is interesting and nicely portrayed, and to me, it just resonated a lot with. I think this issue that we have globally right now about sort of walls being constructed. We went through a period, of walls being constructed after the Second World War and then being taken down in the 80s and 90s, but now being reconstructed, and there's more and more obstacles for people to move around. What with Brexit and with, sending asylum seekers to Rwanda in this country, and all kinds of other things happening globally, and the wall between Mexico and the United States. It does resonate a lot with you. It's a very, very powerful image, and I suppose I'd be interested to know if that are you thinking also of this as kind of like a message, or sort of like a calling card to the world to stop and take notice of these issues that are happening a bit more?
I guess so. I think, without being too political, to not ruin the literary work. But I think, yes, my that was part of my intention to tell. If there's a message, if there's one message in it, it would be like, whatever you do to prevent refugees coming to your country or to your part of the world, it's a futile effort, actually, because you are not solving the reasons, the problems that make someone flee their country, right? So if you don't solve that, there's no solution for refugees coming to you when you are a safer and a better country. So it's very humane. It's a humane issue, and it's a humanitarian issue. So I think the message, yes, would be it's senseless. You can build walls, but people will always try to bore themselves into it or under it or whatever they try. And one thing, talking about the walls and stuff, indeed. So actually, another kind of autobiographical part of it is like I also have lived one whole year behind the wall, which was in Cyprus. I mean, I lived for almost a year on the Turkish side of Cyprus between 1994 and 95, and so my whole so for a year long, I was hoping, or I was looking for opportunities. How can I cross this wall? Because there was really, and still is, a wall between the two Cyprus. So at least in some parts, like in Nicosia, I lived in the Turkish side of Nicosia, which is called Lefkoşa. But then right behind that wall in my hotel room, and I see the wall all the time, and I can't cross it because they would shoot you, And I have so many anecdotes about that wall and living there, which is the subject of some other work. But I had that experience about a wall and living behind the wall. Wishing for getting to the other side for years, and so that was also part
So
of
have you-
choosing this story.
So have you started working on the other parts of the trilogy yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, I'm very slow. I'm very slow in writing, so it can take years again, because this one took also about 10 years to get it done. But yes, I have worked on the second one, but I don't think that will be my second book in English. So probably, yeah.
The glass wall, for me, what made me think of a lot as well is people looking at their smartphones or TV screens and seeing all these other worlds behind these screens and not being able to participate as well. It had that kind of feeling to me of how sort of technology lets people in, and at the same time it sort of says, and that's as far as you go, you know.
Exactly. So that's why I mean about this empathy, because we can understand it, we know all about it, we can know all the details about the life of people in the rest of the world, but do we have really empathy actually? So we can have sympathy, right? It is easy to have sympathy. We are all human beings. We have been through difficult things. I mean, the whole world went through this pandemic. That gives us the ability, to understand other people, to have sympathy. But I don't think if you don't go through something like what I try to show through this novel, like how is it for an asylum seeker coming somewhere and all these dangerous, perilous journeys they make, and that frustration that so easily we just say, sorry, you are not allowed to come in, and so that is lack of empathy, I think, nothing else. Otherwise, and the lack of empathy actually has led to all this kind of crazy ideas, policies, and to prevent refugees coming to you.
Well,
so
a hostile environment and this new dreadful Rwanda policy being, particularly example of those lack of empathy.
Exactly, and that is so the mirror in the mirror symbolism, I think, in the novel. Like
they just see themselves reflected back at themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is next for Afsana Press then?
Well, actually, talking about Afsana Press, so after my book, we published Miki's short story collection in a core, and now we are working on a third book for another. She's also a Kurdish, British Kurdish actually. Choman Hardi is her name. So her novel is in the editing phase, and hopefully by I think we have planned it for March next year. And after that, we have actually also a book by Miki, a novel.
A memoir.
Or a memoir, actually. A memoir by Miki. Yeah. Would you like to talk about that? Or?
We'd have to talk about it now, no. That's for another
We'll have to get you back.
You've also got the paperback and electronic version of the Glass Wall coming on.
Yes, so the paperback of Glass Wall would come, I think, so we have planned it for around 14 September and the ebook in February next year.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
You've been listening to Tabitha Potts, Martin Nathan and Mickey Lentin in conversation with Goran Baba Ali, the author of The Glass Wall. Now we're going to listen to a short extract from The Glass Wall, read by the writer.
The young man stood up and hobbled to the glass wall, leaning on it with both hands. Exhausted, perspiring in his ragged clothes, he peered at the town on the other side. Honestly, this can't just be true. A gust of wind blew sand over him. clattering against the glass. He wanted to shout out, but his lungs felt weighed down, and nothing came out. He started panting in the heavy, dry desert air. He stared at the glass wall that rose high in the sky above, and banged his head on the glass. The sharp pain reminded him of the wound on his brow, from bumping his head on something hard a few days ago in the boat. There were other people as well. Then a splash. He had fallen in the water. Splash. But what had happened before that, he couldn't remember. His sight turned black. He held to the glass and sat down at the foot of the wall. Eyes firmly closed, teeth clenched, he removed the rag from his head, put his sweaty palms to his forehead, and felt the burning sting. He clenched his teeth harder until the pain slightly eased. Opening his eyes, he rested his hands on the glass again and stared at the unreachable landscape. The town seemed even further away. Right behind the glass barrier, just in front of him, stretched a wide asphalt road, behind which the lake. On its far side, several boats, some with masts and sails, were moored in a semicircle. Shadowy human figures moved about on the boats and on the promenade, their presence barely noticeable. From one side to the other, willows, magnolias, maples, shrubs, reeds, and bulrushes encircled the lake, and far, far away to the left, a vast forest filled his view. The lush reflection in the lake of the buildings, the hills, the trees, the clean blue sky, and the moored boats made the world behind the glass even more inciting. He pressed on the glass with all his strength, then banged on it vigorously. No trembling, not even a slight quiver in the hard glass. Only a dull clang resonated as if it was made of iron. He raised his fists again, but overtaken by a wave of nausea, leaned on the wall, his head resting on his forearms. Pounding wouldn't help anyway, when there was no one on the other side to hear him. "Nothing will help, boy. Better to go back," shouted a harsh, metallic voice from nowhere. The young man flinched and turned, searching for the source of the voice. Nobody was inside. "I wouldn't waste your time here. Better go back home," cried the voice again, sounding as if it came from a radio buried somewhere in the sand. The young man jumped up and limped along the glass wall towards the voice, frowning. The man spoke his language in a strange yet comprehensible way. His voice clung as if he was speaking into a tin. It was clear that it was not from a native speaker, so it must have come from the other side of the glass. About 5 meters away, there was a small cement hut right behind the glass wall, with an iron door to the street. Another few steps and the young man came upon a hefty older man in a white shirt, sitting in the hut behind the glass at a desk, peering into a large computer monitor. His grey eyes looked small behind his thick glasses that drooped over his nose. One hand clasped a mouse, whilst the fat fingers of his other hand spread over a keyboard. The young man took another step forward and put his forehead on the glass, careful not to hurt his wound again. The old man was surrounded by 3 bare walls and a low ceiling, with the iron door to his left. On the wall behind him stood a small white air conditioner. The 4th wall of the hut was the glass wall standing between them. A set of blinds was rolled up under the ceiling. The man behind the glass addressed the young man without diverting his eyes from the monitor. "I would of course not want to meddle in your business, but I am warning you, whatever you try, you will not succeed. It's impossible to get in." The voice reached the young man through pinprick holes in the glass, arranged in perfect order within a circle with a diameter of no more than 15 centimeters. On the other side of the glass, behind the holes, a bowl-shaped speaker was fixed with a microphone dangling from it. Under the holes, there was a horizontal slot about 30 centimeters long, but so narrow that only a single sheet of paper could slip through. The young man brushed his fingers over the holes and along the slot, bent his head and held his ear close to the apertures. "Listen, young man," said the old man, his metallic voice coming now directly to the young man's ear, which made him recoil. At the same time, he heard the old man's own voice inside the cubicle, muffled and in another language. "The only way to be let in is to have a good story," the old man continued. The young man lifted his head and stared at the old man. What did he mean? "Here is the procedure," the old man added, releasing the mouse, bothering at last to look at the young man. He took off his glasses and said, "You tell me your story, I type it into this computer and send it on to the authorities. It's up to them to decide whether you pass or not. If they allow you to come in, I open the door for you." The young man looked more closely at the glass between them. There was indeed a rectangular outline in the glass, about 2 meters high and less than a meter wide. It was a glass door, held by a thin metal frame, hardly visible. No lock, and the glass was about 5 centimeters thick. He pushed on it, but the door did not move. How was that possible? How could it be locked without any lock? He hammered on it with all his strength, but in vain. "Don't get agitated, boy. It is said to lock magnetically and can only be opened electronically. Only when your asylum request is granted will I get a code with which I can order the computer to open the door for you. But it's impossible to break it open, I'm telling you." The young man took a step back and saw his own faint reflection in the glass. Disheveled hair and a beard of a few weeks covered his bony chin and cheeks in a disorderly fashion. His tanned face was as dark as his arms, which stung from sunburn. The old man stared at him from the other side of the glass, as if waiting for some reply. "And when you are through the door," the man started again, as there was no response from the young man. "You are not in yet." He leaned forward and pointed to the space in front of his desk. "Don't you see that you will end up inside the turnstile?" The young man looked. There was indeed an enormous turnstile right behind the glass. Why all this? Why don't they just let him in and then ask him questions or whatever they wanted? "Only me, with a push of this button," the old man said, moving aside, allowing the young man to see the large red button on the wall behind him. "You see it, don't you? Only I can open it for you. But before that, I need permission, of course. So come up with your story, I suggest." The man paused and scratched his almost bald head. He straightened, then slumped in the chair, which rolled back on its wheels, his large stomach dangling in his lap. He squinted at the young man and continued, "You look like the type who wants to try it anyway, my advice notwithstanding. Come on, try it then. Tell your story." He rolled himself forward on the chair, back to the desk, and bent over the keyboard. "But I warn you, it's really a waste of time. You will see. And boy, do something about that." He nodded at him, pointing to his wound. The young man pulled out a dirty handkerchief out of the pocket of his worn trousers and wiped the blood from his forehead, looked at the handkerchief, then wiped his brow again. "Your chin too," the guard said, nodding. The young man watched his own reflection in the glass again and wiped his cheeks and chin, then returned the handkerchief to his pocket. He looked left and right. On either side, the glass wall stretched as far as the eye could see.
We'll be back in September with a new short story for you to listen to. Meanwhile, if you're enjoying our work, would you consider supporting us via our Patreon? You can find it on our website www.storyradio.org. Thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.